Frazer Dougherty, and I'm a B-25 pilot. And this idea came because it's the 50th anniversary of the formation of the Air Force, believe it or not. The Air Force was formed in 1947 after the war. That's a strange thing. I never knew that until the other day. But we had this idea of pulling together air crews. First it was pilots, because I'm a pilot, and then it got to be air crews, and then WASPs and WACs and CAP guys, Civil Aviation Patrol. Bill King, is Bill King here? No, Bill King hasn't shown up. He said, can I come? I was in the CAP, and I said, sure. Anyway, we're going to go around the room and introduce ourselves. It's an amazing number of people we've got here. We've got almost 40 people. So we're going to start right here with Walter. You pass it around. Keep it about there and pass it around.
My name is Walter Erschow. I was a bombardier and Ray missions together. So here's... Pass it on.
I'm Ed Moritz, and he covered. We were the 2nd Bomb Group, and we were there in 1944 and 45.
I'm Charlie Townsend, B-17 pilot, 15th Air Force, based in Foggia, Maine, Italy. My combat experience was rather short. I went down on mission number 6 and landed in western Bosnia.
I'm Edgar Pigeon, and I was in 8th Air Force. I got shot down in the 3rd raid, and so I was back in the States by March 44.
122-40483. I'm Dick Niles. I was a radio operator on B-25s primarily, but I also operated on C-47s, but I was a young kid on the block. I enlisted about 3 weeks after D-Day. Then Harry dropped the bomb in 45, and then I became on a flight duty with a whole bunch of pilots in Smoky Hill Army Air Base in Salina, Kansas with the 15th Air Force.
Wait, before David Charney gets it, let's go on the back row here. Were you in the Air Force?
I was in Marine Aviation. I was on the...
Give us your name.
Robert Schwartz. I was a captain on the general staff of the Air Command in Okinawa.
Okay, give it to...
Philip Green, B-29s. I was on the first Tokyo raid.
Were you?
29 Tokyo raid, yeah. And stationed on Saipan.
I'm Al Orchino. I flew at the airport quite a bit. We flew 20 missions, and I unfortunately was shot down on the 20th mission. Everything was packed for me to go home, but I didn't get there. I was in prison for 13 months in Germany.
Dave Charney. I was on B-17s and B-29s, and I was flight chief and flight engineer on the 29s.
My name's Joe Oppenheimer. I was in Air Transport Command up in Assam Valley, flying ammunition and fuel into Kunming and Chengdu for the General Chinools Air Force. And the name of our plane was the Assam Dragon.
I'm Percy Heath, 2nd Lieutenant, fighter pilot with the 332nd and 99th Pursuit Squadron in America.
Wait, let's go. We have a new arrival here, and we'll go. Just your name and what you did.
You mean name, rank, and horsepower? My name is Jarvis Collins. I'm a Navy ex-Navy crewman. I started the war in 1941 at Pearl Harbor, and spent the rest of my career in the Navy in the Pacific Ocean. And thank you for inviting me here. And I went to the old place. That's why I'm so late.
The old place. Boy, you are behind the times.
I'm Dan Harvey. I was a B-25 pilot in the Pacific, as I was, and I also was recalled to active duty during the Korean War, and I was aircraft commander on a C-46s out of Mitchell Field.
I'm Harold Dominy. I was serving the 6th Air Force, 1,700 hours of patrol time. I went overseas in an LB-30, flew B-17s and B-24s, basically.
I'm Harry McIntyre. I served in the 52nd Fighter Group 4th Squadron in Italy, at the point where the spur sticks out into the Adriatic. I did 53 missions. Most of those were escorting bombers. And I see that there were several other people in the same area. And I didn't get over till fairly late, June 44, the end of 44, and I went home shortly after VE Day.
Can everybody hear? Okay. We can't hear ourselves out here, Matt.
My name is Don Miller, U.S. Navy, retired, 1937 to 57. I retired as an aviation chief radio man. I flew in 19 different type aircraft, including dive bombers, patrol planes, PBYs, and so forth.
My name is Harding Isaacson. I was an armor gunner in the 8th Air Force, 467th Bomb Group. Flew my 30 missions in B-24s. Incidentally, the B-24 is the crate that the 17s came in.
Matt, don't forget, let's move these, dolly these cameras around all over the place to get these guys, so you don't miss anything. Please, cameramen, don't stand still. Okay.
Thank you. My name is Edward Monteforti, and I was a bombardier with the 492nd Bomb Group flying out of England. And we got over there just before the invasion, and it didn't last too long.
My name is Jim McCrawson. I was in the 456th Heavy Bombardment Group, stationed in Italy. I flew 50 missions from February 1944 to July 19th, 1944.
I just want to say I'm not a woman, and I was born in New York City, to make it clear that I'm American, and not in the Chinese American composite wing where I flew in the Chinook in China, 14th Air Force. I flew P-40s and P-51s, and flew approximately 87 missions. Okay. I was shot down more times than the Japanese shot down me before. I have more times than I shot them down.
I'm Lee Hayes. I was a bombardier, and then because we couldn't get a job for me, I went back to pilot training. I became a pilot, so I'm one of the Tuskegee Airmen.
I'm Fred Beyer from Sag Harbor, and I was stationed in Italy with the 376th Bomb Group. Flew 18 missions over Europe.
I'm John Sherry from Sag Harbor, and I was bombardier in a B-26 crew in the 9th Air Force and flew 65 missions both before and after D-Day.
I'm Bill Adam from Sag Harbor. I was in the U.S. Coast Guard on the flying out of Miami in PBMs and Catalinas.
I'm Gil Foster. I was in the 447th Heavy Bombardment Group, tail gunner on the B-17, Journey's End.
I'm Ernest Shiverstein, and I was in the 303rd Bomb Group in the 8th Air Force in England. And I was a flight engineer on the B-17, and we crashed on our third mission. We dusted ourselves up and went back to finish about 12 more missions.
I'm Morton Samer. I'm from East Hampton, and I flew co-pilot and then pilot in the 100th Bomb Group between April and September of 1944.
I'm Mario Cerisi, and I was in Kaneohe Bay when the war started, and was in a PBY squadron, VP-11. And I don't know, spent the 2.5 years in the Pacific, and then I was in Corpus Christi instructing in PBMs and other airplanes. But it started with PBYs, and it's still my great love.
I'm Perry Duryea. I was in the Pacific throughout in VR-2 and VR-10 as a plane commander in PBMs and PB-2Is. We did supports on all the landings, and with the PBMs and Ys took out the wounded.
1943, this gentleman next to me and I were aviation cadets, and we've been good buddies ever since. And we graduated from cadets. I became an instructor pilot in twin-engine flight school, and he went on. He'll tell you about him. And then I went to China, and first pilot on C-47s. I flew 77 missions under General Chenault.
I'm Arthur Lasker. I was a P-38 pilot. I flew what Eddie wanted to fly, and he went into twin-engine advanced because he wanted to fly 38s. I went into single-engine advanced, and I got P-38s. Anyway, I was in the Pacific, and I flew out of Nadsab, New Guinea, and Mindoro in the Philippines, and Aishima off Okinawa, and then went up to occupied Japan and Fukuoka, which was not too far from Nagasaki.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Marty Gitlin. I was pleased to hear Mr. Corral, to my right, talk about VR squadrons, because those are Navy squadrons. Perry as well. Marty, of course. I spent time in the Western and Southwestern Pacific. I don't know how many missions I flew, but I considered my existence in the Marianas Chain on Saipan as a country club existence. Thank you.
I'm Ron Spencer. I was a B-24 navigator in the 8th Air Force, the 467th Bomb Group, wonderful bomb group. Flew 35 missions from about the middle of 44 into 45. Thank you.
I'm Bob Barnes. I was in the Troop Carrier Command, and I spent the whole war towing glider pilots all over the United States.
I'm Jim Hurd. I was in the old 10th Cavalry at first, back in the 30s, and received my commission there, and then went to the Air Corps at that time at Tuskegee. Finished there. I'm a command pilot. Flew both fighters, medium bombers, and transport aircraft.
My name is Charles Smith. I was a captain pilot in the 8th Air Force, 46 Bomb Group. We were one of those groups who flew half our missions in 24s and half in 17s, if anybody's interested in a hangar debate. And then went on to transition into 29s in the Pacific.
Ed Herman from Southampton. I joined the Army Air Corps in 1943, October of 1943. And there was an extended program where at first I had to go to CTD, and after that go through the basic courses. It took me 18 months, believe it or not, to graduate, and I thought I'd never get there. And I graduated from Selma, Craig Field, Selma, Alabama, as a single-engine fighter pilot.
My name is Ernest Scher. I was a nose gunner on a B-24, flying bombing missions over Japanese positions in Indonesia, Pescadores, and Indochina, and returned before the war was over, preparing to go back again to complete the job.
We started with you, didn't we? Yes. Yeah. Yeah, you got anything more to say? Now the problem is, okay, yeah. Hey. Hey, Bill King. Here's Bill King. Come on, Bill. Get a chair and come up here. Please. It's your turn. Here we are. Bill, you got a stool right here. Come on. Bill King is you got either a director's chair or a stool, Bill. Come on. You're the last guy. Bill helped start LTV. He was the chairman of the board, and the other, and I didn't know this until yesterday. He said, "Hey, can I join you?" I was in the CAP.
Have mercy.
No, that's wonderful. Come on, who are you?
Briefly. William King, resident, taxpayer, former junior birdman, 1942, soloed in a Ronca two-seater, and bravely thereafter in a Piper Cub, till middle 1943, when I washed out and went to the University of Florida, and have lived happily ever since on my memories of leaving the earth.
Okay, great. Now, let's get some excitement going here, and I don't quite know where to begin and how to begin. So somebody got a hot story that they want to tell us? And if so, we can start there, or we can start by rank. We don't want to do that, because, I don't know whether, I was in the Pacific, in New Guinea, and flew out of Nadzab. And the worst place that we ever flew was WWII, over at WWII, and we have a song that says, I want a wee-wee on WWII. And did you go over WWII? Did you? In your P-38s, yeah. And actually, until those guys came along in their P-38s, we often had no air cover whatsoever. And I guess, and Charlie Lindbergh came out. Were you there when he was there? He came out and taught everybody long-range cruise control on a P-38. But so now, who's got a, you have a story, I know. I was told you had a story.
I have many.
I'm going to hang on to this, because otherwise you'll never let go.
I don't know, because all these are very, very notable people. I'm sort of curious about, I escorted B-24s and B-25s. I'm curious about the 25 that had the 75 millimeter gun in it, the cannon.
Yeah.
And I swear to God, when we were escorting, they shot that thing off at the
plane went backwards. The plane went backwards.
I swear it just seemed to literally stop. It was amazing, most amazing.
Well, the 75, I know about that. I never fired one, but we had, in our theater, we had 14 forward-firing 50 caliber machine guns. Can you imagine that? And we actually strafed and skip-bombed. We never got over 50 feet, and we sat on a parachute. We never strapped it on. We just sat on it. So, but you had a humorous story that somebody told me about. Oh, about the wax. Yeah. About the wax. About the wax.
About the prostitute.
No.
That's why I said I was born in Brooklyn. You know, most Chinese women are flat-chested. So I happen to be very fortunate and find this very voluptuous Chinese lady in the town we were staged out of. And as I was playing with her in bed, she suddenly sat up and laughed like hell. And she said, why do all you Americans like big tits? And I felt, the first time I felt accepted. It's the first time I was called an American. So that's all.
Okay, let's go across the room here. Ed, what have you got to tell us?
How do you top that?
I'm going to hang on to this.
Okay, that never happened to me, unfortunately. There's a story that was interesting. One of the worst missions we ever flew was over Bleckhammer. Those of you guys who were in Italy probably remember it well. But it was the biggest snafu I have ever seen in my life. There were bomb groups going in all directions, facing each other, away from each other, and flak of all colors, and fighters coming in from all. It was a nightmare. To make a long story, nothing happened to us. We ran out of gas and ended up at the little island of Vis. That's the whole story.
Okay. Anybody else got something? Here we are. I'm going to hang on to it, because otherwise you may never sit back.
This gentleman just mentioned about the biggest snafu there ever was. We had a runner-up the first mission we bombed in Africa. We never took the shipping plugs out of the bombs nor put fuses in them.
James?
Yes. I have many stories to tell, but I think I need to do this because the HBO that has come out on the Tuskegee Airmen did not mention the fact that those people who really taught us to fly were the Tuskegee institute personnel, not in the military. The contract was with them to teach us primary flying. And of course, they are very unhappy because they are never mentioned. And then the other thing that I always like to say is that after they finally accepted us to go to a combat, that for 3 months they never gave us an assignment whereby we could shoot down a German airplane. And they recommended that we be sent back to the States. And of course, it was approved all the way up to Hap Arnold. And then, of course, George Marshall stepped in and said, wait a minute, I want to hear more about this. After calling in General Davis, who was a colonel at that time, who told him that we can do anything anybody else can do. Once they were transferred to another unit, the first time they went out and encountered the German aircraft, they shot down 5 in the morning and 3 that afternoon. At the end of the war, we shot down 13 one day. The next day, we shot down 12, 25 in that period of time. And then, of course, the big escorts, escorting the bombers out of England. We never lost a one out of 200 escorts to enemy fighters. And that's the story that I wanted to give quickly on this program. Thank you.
Thank you, James. I have to tell you on top of that, that during the last year of the war, I was the aide and pilot to General Frank O'Driscoll Hunter, who was the commanding general of the 1st Air Force, and flew many times down to Godman Field where there were all kinds of things going on. And it was a very, of course, I didn't know what was going on. And really, I was just a captain and a pilot, and but it was an interesting time for me to have done that. So who else has got something? Okay, Percy. Show it. If you want to show something, show it like that, and the camera can show it like. Yes, it can. Yes, it can. Just yeah.
But that's the
yeah.
record of Tuskegee Airmen
yeah.
in this paper.
Right.
But
okay.
I have a very humorous story. It happened when I was flying P-47s, and of course we had the white instructors coming back from combat as our flight leaders. And they wanted us to show off in these strange field landings. And of course we had goggles, gas masks, or the oxygen mask, gloves. We were completely covered. So when we landed, we did one of those 360s and scooted in. He was very pleased, our flight leader. And we pulled up to the flight line, and this white sergeant, of course it was a strange field landing in Sumter, South Carolina. And we pulled up there, and he gave us the signals and cut off the motors and gave us the signal. I opened the canopy. He jumped up on the wing, pulled off my oxygen mask, and lifted the goggles. He almost fell off the wing. And he popped to and gave me a sharp salute. He says, "Excuse me, sir." He says, "I didn't know they had black, no, it wasn't black then. I didn't know they had colored pilots, sir." And I said, "Oh yeah, we've been flying for several years now," and you know, I've explained it to him. But he said, "I didn't know we had colored boys flying," even though he called me lieutenant, you know. But it was in South Carolina, so what could you expect?
Yeah. Okay, anybody else? Here we are. Get over to my corner over here.
You know, we all like to remember.
I'm supposed to hang on to this, so you don't keep it forever.
Okay. Now, we all like to remember stories with happy endings. And fortunately, we're the ones who came back and can tell those stories. And the real heroes are the guys who never came back. But one of the last missions we were flying was off Aishima over to Kyushu, Japan. I was leading a flight, and a young boy by the name of Kennedy was taking off. He was tail end Charlie. And on takeoff, he lost one engine, and we were carrying 2 napalm bombs under our belly. And the kid hits the bomb release at the end of the runway, and it doesn't work. So he uses the manual release, and the bombs go off right at the end of the runway, and he goes in. There's no way he's going to fly with a single engine with the load of armament, weight, and everything else that we had. And he goes in. Normally you might pancake in, but the 38 had all the power and weight in the engine and the forward part, so she went right down under, and he was underwater. And he pulls his canopy, and the canopy won't go up. So he's got to pull down the window, get out his shoulder straps, his seat belt, his parachute, everything, and wait until the cockpit fills up with water. He finally gets out of the thing and comes up and takes a breath of air, pulls his Mae Western. It doesn't work. Nothing worked. And that poor kid, but he was okay, and he came out of it great, and that's the important thing.
Well, actually, I thought that we really all should take a minute and think about the guys that are still there or wherever they are. I know I lost my co-pilot and saw a plane land in up the Sepet River, and the whole crew get out and walk away, and that was the last we ever heard of him. And I'm sure I never got anything but a couple of bullet holes in my plane, but there. So let's take a minute and say to the world that about all those guys that are still there.
I'm sure we've all had our tragedies and our difficult moments, but someone mentioned the word snafu, and it reminded me of my very first mission in China. And I was ordered to go down, I think we're on the Salween River, it may have been the Mekong River, you may remember those rivers. And I was ordered to go down and find a DZ, or a drop zone, to drop a whole load of ammunition, food, and medical supplies to the Chinese. I found the place, and there were the flags out on the ground, and I wagged my wings, and they waved to me, and my crew dumped everything out. It took about 3 or 4 passes, and they're waving, they're picking everything up, and I waggled my wings and one more pass, and I headed back home. Got a radio message from home base. Don't drop that load, don't drop that load. So I said, would you mind telling me why? They said, we just got word that the Japanese took that over about an hour ago. And I said, I trained 2 years for this? That was my first mission.
Okay.
Yeah, on December 16th was the beginning of the Battle of the Bulge. We took off on a mission, and the weather was very, very bad. In fact, we couldn't even see the end of the runway. But in those days, they didn't have radar. You just took off, so there's such a rate of climb and such a time, and then you turn. And when you come out of the top, there's about 1,000 planes flying in circles. And then you start shooting flares. Each group had their own flare. So anyway, we were recalled and couldn't find the field. And we ended up in the northern part of England. And being we had the bombs and the gas and everything, we couldn't drop the bombs, not knowing where they would land, even though they would be unsafe. So we did crest into the top of this mountain up in northern England and killed a bombardier and the...
That's yes.
Yeah, and a navigator. So anyway, we came down. We got separated because it was snowing. Part of the crew went down one side, and me and the pilot, who was all smashed up, his face, and I was a little banged up. And when we got to the bottom of the hill, the English were there, an Englishman and his wife, and they thought we were Germans. We had this green uniform on and the parachute harness. So after we convinced them that we were all right, you know who we were, then they took us to an RAF hospital. So then after about a month, and we went to a rest camp, and then we went back on flight. We had a choice, but being stupid kids, we went back to flying.
What was your plane?
B-17.
B-17.
Yeah. In 1968, they found some Boy Scouts, or equivalent of Boy Scouts, found a wreck up on the hill. Oh, yeah. And we had a big reunion in New York, and we had Colonel Kaprisky, yeah, he was there, and General Spatz and General Acre, and we had I have some pictures here, and we had a reunion.
Get them out, and we can look at them. The camera can find them. So anybody who has any pictures, just hold it up like this, and hold it up like that, so the camera can sort of, keep it, about like that. Anybody who has any pictures, if you just show them like that, one of the cameras can pick that up.
Picture of the boys that found the wreck, right. And then they put up a little plaque. And I just wanted to show you.
Right.
Wherever he is. Oh,
Do you and your crew get together from?
that I know is the radio operator, and he lives in South.
Oh yeah. Right. Right. Okay, that's a great story. Yeah.
Okay, no story here, but this gentleman reminded me to say that what kind of kids we were when we were doing this. I had most of my missions done before I turned 20.
Is that right?
Affirmative. And these guys are all young, even though we look like old fossils at this time.
Yeah, that's so. When were you first flying? What year?
Well, I started flying in '42, right out of high school. I enlisted, and I started. Well, I was assigned to a B-17 as a co-pilot, as I said earlier, and then got checked out sometime and about halfway through the missions. But we stayed together as a team. One mission I was the captain, and the other mission I had a great first pilot.
What was your plane?
A B-17.
B-17. Yeah. How many B-17 guys are here? 1, 2. Well, look at them all. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And B-25s? Hey. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. 4.5. P-38. You're the only P-38 guy here, I'll bet you.
I ended up flying a B-25, becoming a first pilot after 4 hours. We got a Fat Cat B-25 airplane in, and I had to fly down from Okinawa to Manila to pick up some parachutes and liquor and all of that stuff, so I checked out. And after 4 hours, I became a first pilot on a B-25.
What happened to the other guy? Perry, you got something? I hear something coming out. Ed?
On a lighter note, Phil Green, who's over there, and a fellow named Johnny Greer and I were all at school upstate New York, Colgate University at the same time. Phil said he was flying B-29s off Tinian. I went into Saipan in a PB-2 that was rigged with 40 litters to take out a bunch of wounded. The beachhead, the Marines, 2nd Marine Division hit there, and it was 2 days after they landed. So as we're up the wounded, the guy who was in charge of the beach came out. He said, "Don't leave the airplane." He said, "The Japs are swimming out and throwing hand grenades into the seaplanes." I would want to find a fellow named Johnny Greer, who I went to school with. Oh, he says, "He's right in there in a foxhole." He said, "I'll run you in." So I grabbed a bottle that we carried just in case we had any snake bite. And he went in and dove in this foxhole. I said, "Hi, John. How are you?" He turned around. He says, "What the hell are you doing here?" I said, "I brought you this." Well, they had overrun a Jap position where they found some crab meat that had been packed in the U.S. So he said, "I'm going to crack the crab meat, you crack the scotch." I said, "Well, I got to make a takeoff here pretty soon." But we did a ceremonial touch, and John, I saw at reunions thereafter, obviously they took Saipan, and he was just a great guy. Looked just like he did when he was playing football.
I'll be right back. Johnny Greer, where are you? This.
We're switching. Okay. It's on. This isn't on. Yeah, it is. Me neither.
Okay. What are you doing? Get it going, and then Johnny Greer, where are you? Where? Phil Green? Where? I want a Johnny Greer. Where is here? Phil Green, you're going to talk about Johnny Greer? I don't know. What? He doesn't know what Perry's talking about. Okay. So we'll come back to that.
Well, he wasn't privy to that situation at Saipan. He wasn't privy to that situation at Saipan. He was just flying off Tinian, which is so close you could see one from the other on a clear day. Well, Johnny is not with us anymore.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Wait a minute. We have somebody.
To read this, and I think it's very apropos. It says, "Don't blame the elderly for the failings of society. We are probably the only members of society in the history of mankind for which the younger generation has so little respect and has demonstrated such a shameful lack of regard. Senior citizens are constantly being criticized, belittled, and sniped at for every conceivable deficiency of the modern world, real and imaginary. Upon reflection, I would like to point out that it wasn't the senior citizens who took the melody out of music, or the beauty out of art, or the pride out of appearance, or the romance out of love, the commitment out of marriage, the responsibility out of parenthood, togetherness out of family, learning out of education, loyalty out of Americanism, service out of patriotism, the hearth out of the home, civility out of behavior, refinement out of language, dedication out of employment, prudence out of spending, or ambition out of achievement. And we certainly are not the ones who eliminated patience and tolerance from relationships. I think it's a very...
Great, okay. Thank you very much, Arthur. We have a new guest here. Bill?
Yeah, Bill Jenkins.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? And are you a WASP? Oh, wife. That's... Was she? Okay. Okay, we've got... take the mic and...
Yeah. Well, Mr. Isaacson over there, he was in the same outfit that I was, 2nd Bomb Division. I was in 8th Air Force, and I was in Norwich, England. I spent 2 years over there with the 8th Air Force, the 2nd Bomb Division. And I don't know what else I can say. Well, I was in communications. There are a lot of guys that don't like me because I was the guy that sent them on their missions. I was the guy that took the field order coming down from 8th Air Force headquarters, which was Pine Tree. And then I would take that and cut a tape on it and send it out to all the bomb groups who would be flying the mission the next day, wherever it was Germany or France or whatever. And so that was my mission, to send these guys on their missions. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, we got somebody else back here. Jim, you want to tell us about you? Jim has just come in, so...
Actually, I'm not a veteran at all. I was never in service. However, my brother was a pilot on the B-24 out of Attleboro on the 466th Bomb Group. I don't know if there's anyone here for the 466th, but if there is, I'd like to talk with him. Part of the story is that a book was written about the crew that went down on April 21st. It was one of the last bombing raids on Germany. It was the last plane to be shot down, American bomber shot down in Germany. We received the news of the missing in action on VE Day, which was very mixed emotions at home. In any case, I missed service because I was classified 5A as a sole surviving son, but it's a sad price to pay.
Thank you, Jim, and welcome to our circle here. Okay, Fred Beyer is here. Why don't you? I'll hold the pictures up and you talk.
I feel we need a little equal time here for the B-24 guys. I haven't heard much from them. The 8th Air Force and the B-17s always did have better PR than we did. But this is a B-24. They built more B-24s than any other heavy bomber during and after World War II. Most of them were in Italy, but we also had a wing or two in England.
And the Pacific, we had some.
I'd like to tell you a little story about the beginning and the end of my 18 missions. And people always ask me, was I scared? If
you weren't, you were crazy.
What were your feelings? And I said, well, I do remember being scared, really scared, on my first mission. It was the policy in the 15th Air Force. I don't know if they did this at other places, but when you came in as a replacement crew, the pilot and all other crew members were assigned to go with another crew on a mission before you went out with your own crew. So I was flying co-pilot for another crew, and we were going down the bomb run at one of our worst targets at that time, which was the marshalling yards in Vienna. And I had nothing to do. I had nothing to do but look out the window, and I saw these flak bursts, And I just figured, this is the end. I'm never going to live through this. And that's the only time that I ever flew without having some. After that, I was pilot, airplane commander, and a lot of experiences, a lot of problems, but I was never really as scared as that first one. The last one is one I got to tell you about, because there was a good-for-nothing target up in the Brenner Pass. And it was a railway bridge, and we don't bomb railway bridges as a strategic target. We bomb big things like railway yards, oil refineries, factories, and so forth. But they had the Germans were pouring out of Italy by the whatever, and they were taking all the heavy equipment they could find. The only way to get it back into Germany was to go over a bridge or through the Brenner Pass. So they had a little side path that went over a bridge up there called Vipitino Railway Bridge. They sent in the fighters, the fighter bombers. Couldn't get to it because the mountains were so high all around. They had the whole thing ringed with guns, and they were shooting down on these guys trying to get the bridge. B-25s were called in from Corsica, the 12th Air Force. This should interest you. They couldn't get there. They lost a lot of planes, but they couldn't get it. So, okay, finally they'll say, well, high altitude bombing, we'll send in the B-24s. So the 376th and a lot of other groups down that way were sent in to do the job. We got there, and of course somebody in G2 forgot to figure out that if the mountains were 12,000 feet high and we're at 25,000, that cut it in half, so they're shooting everything they got, including throwing rocks at us. We lost a lot of airplanes. But that was my last mission, and that's the one where they got me. They blew us they blew us out of the formation. We lost most of our systems like hydraulics and even our oxygen, including all of the flight controls, and we were spiraling towards the ground. I flipped on a thing that most guys didn't even remember what it was because we never used them, and that was an autopilot. And the autopilot has gyros in it, and most of the time they didn't even turn them on. I had always turned mine on, and it was a flip of the finger. And while we were preparing to bail out, the plane was wallowing and wallowing and wallowing, and finally it started to right itself. I canceled the order to bail out. We headed for Switzerland. We'll bail out there. Pretty soon we're flying pretty good on the autopilot. So I kind of got it turned around and had a new kind of an autopilot. The old type were Sperry, made by Sperry gyroscope. And once you engaged it, you could not change it. And if you were wrong, then you were going to climb, you were going to die, whatever. The new one, which just came out, was the Minneapolis Honeywell C1, and you could turn controls, knobs, and it would send a signal to a little actuator in the wing, and then you could actually fly the airplane. So I flew it back, and we looked for a long stretch of beach just north of the spur in Italy, and I got her on the ground. They gave me the DFC for that.
Well, you deserve it.
Let's hear some more about these B-24 guys from Italy.
Any more B-24 guys around want to talk? Here we've got...
I don't know if you consider it a plus now. We flew both B-24s and B-17s, but the B-24 was the fastest burning airplane the Air Force had.
The B-25 and the B-26 were the noisiest planes, right? Right, John?
They were noisy. They used to say one a day in Tampa Bay. When we went for operational training, that WAGs used to say one a day in Tampa Bay. But here's a sort of story. Everybody here remembers the first combat mission they went on, and it's not a particularly pleasant memory. Well, the first one I went on, I didn't go on with my own crew because I'd gotten sick in Ireland, and they had a regulation that you had to go with another crew. And this guy, the pilot of the crew, had the wind up. And there was a 3-hour delay. And at the end of 3 hours, he had me so scared that I didn't know what to do. And we set off, and nobody had ever told me about window. You know, the chaff that was thrown out in front of you to confuse the flak predictors. And so this window was coming back. And when we got back from the mission, I said, boy, that flak was really heavy today.
Did you know Jack Vitor?
No.
He was a B-26 pilot also.
The thing about B-26s is that they were such a terrible airplane that the pilots that flew them were awful good. And that one a day in Tampa Bay is no joke. That's the ones that got through there really were good.
Okay. Thank you, John Cherry. We're with Hardy and Isaacson.
Well, here I am.
Wait a minute. Let me give you your picture back. Here, I can hold the pictures.
After I washed out as an aviation cadet, I ended up in the Armament and Gunnery School and was assigned to the 492nd Bomb Group up in North Pickenham, where Ed Monteforte was a bombardier. The one mission I want to mention, the roughest mission I've had between the 492nd and the 467th was over Kiel, Germany. And I did keep a record of all of my missions, the targets and all of that sort of thing. This was 1944, 6 hours, 55 minutes, a gasworks, heavy accurate flak, no fighters, 35 flak holes in the ship, fire on the flight deck, hydraulic system out, over target, ruined all 4 engines, prepared to ditch in the North Sea, made it back to base, only ship hit hard, period. This is Black Albert Shower, who Mr. Spence knew. This was the 467th Bomb Group. We had...
Who was Black Albert Shower?
He was the CO, a West Point graduate, and we flew 100 operational bombing missions in 40 days. Incidentally, I had a younger brother, Bill, who was 21 years of age and was a tail gunner on a B-17 and was shot down and killed over Kassel, Germany. Thank you.
I have a story to tell you about tail gunners. Be with you in a minute. The tail gunner, the B-29 pilot who flew over Japan, and their oxygen was shot out, and the tail gunner passed out because the oxygen was out, and he so the plane lands, finally gets back to base, and lands, and he wakes up in the blister of the B-29 tail gunner, tail position, and he wakes up and it's dead silence. He doesn't hear anything. He says, "Oh my God, what's happened?" They've all bailed out, and what'll I do? So he pulls open the. I've never been in this blister, so I don't know. He pulls the window release and jumps out and breaks his leg on the concrete. So, wait a minute, we've got Bob back here. Oh. Oh yeah. So we believe you. We believe you. A Marine.
I'm proud to be with this group, which probably has done as much as any concentrated group of people to save democracy, what we did. And I'd like to do 2 things, tell a couple of quick stories and then make some observations about the senior citizen comments. First, as a ground officer, we had a lot of responsibility to keep the planes flying and to do everything to help the people who flew. And yet we had our opportunities and requirements to fly so that we knew what was going on. And I guess the most frightening thing that happened to me in even taking controls of a transport wasn't rough as getting in the bubble of a bomber and then looking around and saying, "My God, I'm not in the airplane." I'm sticking out at the end. One of our pilots was Ty Power, the actor. And at the end, when we were being solicited to stay in the Marine Corps, he said, "Well, if I could get the same treatment, that is $500,000 for one job and pick my own leading ladies, I'd stay in." I was offered to go with our commanding general as his aide to China, and I said too that I'm a civilian and I want to go back. One of the things that I did at the end of my tour was to go to Nagasaki, where the Marines did the burial, and the Marine officer who was in charge then took me about the whole area. I was there, fortunately, for less than a half a day, and I saw where the bulldozers that he had pushed the bodies into graves, and standing in the middle, looking up from to the sky from where the bomb was exploded, you could see exactly where it was, because anything that remained on the right side, and there was very little that did, leaned to the right, and anything to the left leaned that way. And it was, I guess, not just my background toward peace that when I left, but going through some of this that warranted my looking at the fact that while we here have done such a great job, that it's not the military that saves the world, it's the negotiations and the lack of force that we need. And I wondered how many people here who had served and who had the best equipment available and the best facilities feel now that it's not that kind of fighting that makes a better world, and that the senior citizens who have left the world or leaving it to the younger people haven't left such a great world at this point.
Thank you, Robert Schwartz. Charlie?
I mentioned earlier I went down on mission number 6, but that was not due to enemy fire. The aircraft must have been overtaxed on a prior mission, because trying to keep up with the squadron, we lost one engine, and then we lost a second one. We figured we better turn around and head back for Italy, and in doing so, we lost number 3. And we still had the mountains to go over, and we still had the Adriatic to cross before we could get to Italy. So we had the crew bail out. Pilot, I was flying co-pilot because I was new over there, but we got out and landed in the mountains. But one thing I remember about the bailing out, we had no prior instruction. I knew the chest pack was uppermost, pulled the ripcord and nothing happened, I thought. But then the pilot chute came out, and then the chute came out, and I remember how still everything was, peaceful and quiet until we got close to the ground, and then we were approaching very rapidly. So I landed in a tree. They told you could direct your direction by spilling the air out of the chute. Well, I tried that, and I thought I was going to spill everything out, so I just left it to the Lord to get me down that way. So these rough-looking people came running to us, and I found out I thought this was it, but they took us and gave us food and so forth and so on. And then they told us that they were going to spirit us out of that area. The Germans knew we had landed there. They had picked up the rest of the crew. They knew we were there. They said they were going to take us down to Serbia, which they did. We traveled it by night, and it took us, we finally got into Serbia. We were in Yugoslavia about 10 weeks total before an evacuation system was set up to get us out of there back to Italy. So I did see a lot of the mountains of Yugoslavia. Fortunately, it was in the summertime. We went down, what we found was D-Day, and if it had been the wintertime, it would have been almost impossible. But that was the extent of my combat mission. But and after that, we went back to Italy. Then our orders were to return to the United States.
So you didn't fly again after that? Yes. Yep.
As I mentioned before, I started this thing for you guys. I was at Pearl Harbor on December the 7th. In fact, I was in a flight between Midway and Pearl Harbor, attacked by Japanese aircraft. Went back into Midway. Was attacked by two destroyers that blew our hangar off. Then went back to Pearl. Flew all night. Went back to Pearl, and when I got there, I stopped for a moment and saw the Arizona sinking, saw the California sinking, and with the 3,000 guys that we lost there, I stand in awe, and I pray for all those boys.
Okay, one sec. We're going to interconnect right now with Cablevision at Riverhead, so we're going to start a little thing over again just for them. Also, this program is being programmed and broadcast live throughout the entire East End by WWII. That's channel 58. And now, are we hooked up yet? Victor? Chris? Yes? No? 1, 2, 3? All right. So I just want to give them a lead-in when that happens. I think it's been actually great. All of you guys, and if we dream up some more stories, because we have another hour to kill here, and can we do it? Do you think? Can we do it? Yeah. So, all right, not yet. What's going on here? Shall I get another story going, or what? Speak up. Okay. Well, let's pretend we are, and if they're not, they're late. Okay. This is Channel 27 in East Hampton, LTV, and we're here with, we're here with 40 or more aircrew members who earned flight pay during World War II. And we've got really a wonderful composite of guys. I had no idea this many Air Corps people here, and I'm really kind of thrilled that it's happening. Channel 27, community access for the East End of Long Island, and I'm Frazer Dougherty. Joe had his hand up here.
I got it, Joe. On a very much more light note, I don't know how many of you fellows remember when you got a raise in rank, but my recollection was quite vivid. We had a Civil Air Patrol pilot that was ferrying over the C-47s from the States, and we were doing 100-hour inspections before we let them go into service. And the Civil Air Patrol pilot insisted on coming up for a checkout ride, and our commanding officer, the CO of the base, was showing off, and coming back into the base, he decided to buzz the field, and he knocked the top off the flagpole. We had a wooden flagpole, and a piece about 6-8 inches was embedded in the wing. Problem was that he tore up the de-icer boots, and they wouldn't let the plane fly across the hump at that time without the boots. And he said to me, at that time I was engineering officer, he said, can you get this thing fixed? I said, well, maybe. And we requisitioned the necessary parts. Meantime, the plane stayed out of service, and we got all kinds of calls, why isn't the plane in service? Finally got it fixed, put it back in service. Next time they put up the ranks, I got my bar, silver bar.
You reminded me of something, and it just flew out of my head. David Charney, you've got some nice pictures here. So you haven't said anything, have you yet?
No, I don't have to say anything. No, I'll just show pictures.
Show us that good-looking picture of you. God, is a movie star.
Thanks a lot.
Well, anybody else got something going here? Here we are, Mario.
One thing I
Look at his necktie. Will you?
Oh, thank you. I've got a couple of pictures here. I want to talk about that and a recent reunion at Reno between the people that were at Kaneohe and December 7th, 1941, and we had a wonderful time. We had a wonderful time. The only problem with it was that this is what I looked like back in the time when the war started, and I know that I've grown older. I see myself in the mirror every day, but it kind of is gradual. Now, I hadn't seen the rest of these guys since 1942, I think.
They looked terrible, didn't they?
Well, I walked into that conference room at the Sands Regency in Reno, and I saw guys with canes and wheelchairs and walkers, and I didn't recognize anybody. And I mean, you understand, they were all kids when we parted. So it was a little bit discouraging to sit at the dining room table and be hearing about which HMO do you belong to, and where do you get your prescriptions? And I, you know, it really tore me up. And they were all very surprised that I still had just passed another flight physical, that I had just renewed my instructor certificate, and I was still flying, and I couldn't believe it. So that was that story. It was a little bit sad. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was PBYs had 14 hours of fuel aboard, 1,400 gallons. We burned 48 gallons an hour per engine, and figuring the takeoff and the climb and everything, it averaged out 100 gallons an hour. And we used to fly 1,400-mile missions, 1,450. 700 out, 50-mile dog leg, 700 back. And this was on patrols. So fuel got to be real critical, and the way we managed it was instead of going from auto rich to auto lean, we would go to manual lean. It was somewhere between auto lean and idle cutoff, and a flight engineer had to sit there and monitor head temperatures and keep the cowl flaps open and everything else so we could cut the fuel consumption by a couple of gallons. Anyway, we got back from one of these missions, we're landing at Kaneohe Bay, and we were flying boats, didn't have any amphibious gear at that time. And the procedure was to come perpendicular to the ramp, and one guy on the ramp would hook a line into the wingtip float. There'd be a swimmer in the water, hook a line on a tail, another swimmer in the water, hook a line on the other wing. But as soon as that one guy on the ramp got a line hooked into the wingtip float, we'd use the annunciator lights to the flight engineer up in the tower and say, cut engines. And on this one flight, annunciator lights, cut engines, he reaches up to get the mixture controls and cut them, and the engines died. Never touched them at all. So that was cutting it close.
You can say that again. I once, we went, one of our later missions went to New Ireland, which is on the other side of New Britain, on a mission, and it was supposed to be a milk run. So everybody went, the intelligence officers and the cook and the whatever, they all decided that they'd go. Well, it was the worst mission we ever had. 11 airplanes were shot down. And actually a PBY came along and picked up all 11 crews, which is about 60 people. Now, is that possible?
Yeah.
And that guy got the Congressional Medal of Honor for doing that. Have you ever, did you know that, hear that story? Was that anything that you knew? Anybody here know anything about that story? Is it true? It's a big lie, maybe. Okay. How about 60 people, can you imagine?
Well, I picked up 35 one time, some pretty heavy seas, and we're all oil soaked and everything else. But we landed, started picking people out of the water. One of the crewmen in the port waist had the blister open, and he sees a guy floating in the water with a K-Poc life jacket, and he grabbed him by the hair to lift him out, and all he had was the shoulders. You know, so it was pretty horrible.
One of the things that's local that might interest people is that during World War II, the Navy had a torpedo testing set up in Montauk. They had shipped the torpedoes in at vast warehouses, the site of the old fishing village, and a large barge out in Fort Pond Bay. After they had fooled with the gyros and so forth on the torpedoes, they would move them out to that barge and then test shoot them into the Sound. And there was a fleet of airplanes up on the west side of Fort Pond. There was a big hangar, and they would trace them. Well, I hope that none of the people who were involved in that were involved in any of the torpedoes that went into Chihuahua, because 14 torpedo bombers went in there, and only 6 had live torpedoes. So.
Anybody a torpedo pilot? Or on a crew? That's something I never, scared the heck out of me. The worst thing that I ever did, the most scared I think that I ever was at Mitchell Field, where things were quiet and peaceful. I was permitted to fly anything that was on the base, And so one day I'd flown everything except a P-47. And to me, a P-47 was a scary-looking machine. It was so big and everything like that. So I finally decided that I would do it. And I have never, ever been so scared in my life as taking off in that P-47. I was so scared that I landed, got out of the airplane, and got back in it and took off again. Because, you know, when you fall off a horse, somebody...
Frazer, we had an expression that any mission you came back from was a milk run. Anyone you walked away from. But we had operations in the fall of 1944 in Italy that were called lone wolf missions. And these were missions that were set up to send individual planes up over enemy territory in bad weather during times when they couldn't get larger formations off the ground. And all of our operations of B-17s were designed to be used with large formations. And all of a sudden we found individual planes flying up over cities like Vienna, serious targets up in Austria, Germany, and so forth. And they were very difficult missions, but they tried them. And I think that the thing that I think about occasionally is the fact that we tried everything, no matter what it was designed for. They forgot about that when they had to, like the B-25Hs that had the 75mm cannons on, the gun pods and so forth, where they converted medium bombers to strafers, low altitude, even though they were designed for high altitude. So that was what I wanted to say about that.
Yeah, and actually, in the strafing, our strafing runs really were kind of scary flying experiences, because we would fly to a mission in a normal formation, and then when we got to the target, in a squadron there are 12 planes, are there, or 15, or roughly 12 to 15 planes. We flew abreast across the target. I mean, you know, wingtip to wingtip. Everybody got out. I mean, that in itself, it did some kind of a turn, and in the middle of the turn, the guys on the outside sped up, and when you got to the target, there were 14, 15 airplanes flying abreast, shooting their guns and dropping bombs at 50 feet. It was, I mean, it's a wonder you just didn't fly into your neighbor.
Ed Morris and I were on the same missions to Vipitino and Brenner Pass that Fred flew on. Yeah.
Did you know that? You didn't know that until today?
Tour of Europe. You know, it wasn't Cook's, but it was still a good tour.
We have a yes, Percy.
You spoke of being afraid of the P-47. Well, my commitment to go to Europe in the P-4 to fly P-51s, which I could just taste that was the best airplane. And they started ferrying out all the P-40s, and they brought in these P-47s. And one of the instructors, Captain Wisniewski, was going to show us how he flew the P-47 in Europe and how safe it was. And he tried to make one of those 360s within the parameter of the airport like we used to do with the P-40s. And he splashed at the end of the runway and broke everything on the left side. So my experience with the P-47, later on after I got to fly it and I understood that after 10,000 feet you were cool because you could put the blower on and you were superior. But we were up for gunnery out of Waldoboro, South Carolina one day. And two guys go in to fly on the target, and the other two guys just fool around on the side before they're called in to shoot. And I rolled this P-47 over, and I didn't have the oxygen mask plugged in, and I smelled this gas. And I rolled back over, and I looked down, and in my feet was about 2 inches of gasoline in the cockpit. Immediately, I plugged in full oxygen and called the airport. Said, I got a little problem here. I got gas in the cockpit. Well, this 100-octane gas. This guy says, what, you know, he was shocked too. And he said, well, I'll give you a vector because there was no radar back there. And we took the wind vector and headed back to the airport, and they were going to head me straight in. And I looked down at the end of the runway. There was the meat wagon and all the
And this guy said, don't open the cockpit, you know, be sure not to open, because the vapors from that, if I open the cockpit, then the exhaust would just blow it up in the air. So I'm going back to the field, and to end the story, I made a successful straight-in approach, landed the thing. He says, easy 19, pull over to the side, don't come up on the apron with the plane. And he's instructing me to shut off the engine now and sit there, don't open it yet, you know. So I sit there a minute, I'm calm, you know, because we're in training to go through these emergencies and do the procedure that you're supposed to do to save yourself. And when I finally opened that cockpit and got out of that plane, must have been about 3 seconds, I was over about 50 feet away looking at the plane, and that's when my knees started shaking. But P-47, that seam had opened up in that wing tank, and that's a pretty frightening experience.
Another P-47. Anybody else? We got.
I've heard a number of the guests here who have made emergency parachute jumps. I made one myself, and I think I could be criticized for my gross stupidity. I had flown PBMs. Who was it that flew? Yeah, I'd flown PBMs, and the war was over. We were assigned to Pensacola for further reassignment, but we needed flight time. So a fellow by the name of Joel and I got into an N2S Stearman to do some aerobatics. And the loop was not bad. The fact that I almost destroyed a flight of SBD Dauntless dive bombers has nothing to do with the story, but it may have something to do later on. The next maneuver was a slow roll, and of course the nose went through the horizon, and as every good pilot knows, forward stick to keep the nose up. And I got into an inverted flat spin, just like that. And the N2S Stearman, I think everybody knows, is an open cockpit airplane. And I unhooked my safety belt, fell free of the airplane, pulled the ripcord, looked at it, pulled it smartly. I was at about 1,000 feet then. The fellow who was sitting in the front seat landed in a cow pasture, hailed me to get into the airplane. It was a funny, funny story. Needless to say, we endured a court-martial, not a court-martial exactly. The captain of the base at Pensacola enumerated what we did that was incorrect. And I flew back without a parachute. Now that's a no-no under any circumstances. I put it in the baggage compartment. So he enumerated that. And the thing that I had to do was to buy the parachute rigger a bottle of booze. I think it's customary. And I was thinking about 3 feathers or 4 roses, so I knew he was from the state of Georgia, so I got him a bottle of Southern Comfort. Then came the proposed court-martial, and the captain said, "Get out of here." He enumerated what we didn't do and what we did do. If only, does everybody know about Kelly Flynn? She was the Air Force woman pilot of a B-52.
Co-pilot.
Co-pilot, yeah. If her captain, her commanding officer, had the same kind of sensitivity and sense as my CO did, she wouldn't be in that position. I blame the lawyers for not making a better deal. Making a motion addressed to the complaint itself would have been the answer. Taking it up to the U.S. Supreme Court would have been the answer to let Kelly, First Lieutenant Kelly Smith, emerge from the service intact, emotionally intact. That's about it. I like the story. It's a funny story. If I didn't bail out, we both would have landed inverted, for the reason that we were improperly balanced. There was too much gravity aft. That's a Navy term. I didn't know where aft was, so.
Actually, I got court-martialed once. Also, we were on a training mission, and it was practically the only time that I flew as a co-pilot in a B-25. And I had this hotshot instructor who was the pilot. And so we were on some kind of a training mission to go bomb Florida or something. And so we took off with a full load of fuel. No machine guns in the nose of this. This is just a training plane, but it was full of fuel. And we were barreling down the runway, and he turns to me and yells, "Wheels up!" That's what I thought he yelled anyway. And you're not supposed to talk in the cockpit. You're supposed to give hand signals. And I said, I leaned over to him and said, "What did you say?" And he said, "Pull the wheels up." And so I said, I looked out the window and I said, "Well, all right, I'll pull them up." You know, these instructors were so good that they like to pull the wheels up and fly off that way instead of getting up and then pulling the wheels up. So I pull the wheels up, and of course the plane settles down and the propellers nick on the concrete and sparks are flying and the plane is full of fuel and a full crew. And we come to a gliding stop and all jump out of the plane. And I was court-martialed we were all court-martialed. He was sent away and I was court-martialed for doing something dumb. And it was dumb. He said, what he said was, pull the flaps up, or lower the flaps or something. I don't know what he said, but anyway. I learned a lesson.
Frazer, if I may, Eddie and I, when we were driving over here this morning, we were talking about the fact, how come we're still here? And we were thinking back, I'm sure it's happened to every one of us at one time or many times. For example, on my solo flight in the P-38, I'll never forget it. All right, what we had to do was we'd fly around, take off, fly around. We're all by ourselves. First time you're in the airplane, there's no guy flying with you. And coming in for a landing, we came down over the runway, combat landing, peel up like that, drop your flaps, and lower your gear. And I'm coming in, and I'm pulling back on the wheel, and she's not responding. And I'm going to go right in. And it wasn't until the last second I pulled back on my trim tabs, because all the weight is in the nose. Pulled back on my trim tabs, and I came down. I smacked the dirt right before the runway, bounced into the air, little throttle, and settled down. Now, how come? There was something there, and for every one of us, we've all had experiences where in 1 second we could have been dead, and we lived through it. And there's no question about who that person was sitting by our side.
Dumb luck is what I say.
I would say training.
Training and dumb luck, right?
In regards to
Yes, sir. 1 sec, Mario.
My name's Paul Sauer. I was a seaman apprentice in the Navy, and when the war ended, I left the Navy in 1948, a seaman apprentice. I had a wonderful career. But anyway, I asked Albert Orcino to join us here today, and coming over, we chatted a bit about his 13 months as prisoner of war. I think we're going to have to prod him, but I think he'll have some interesting story to tell you.
Albert, come on, loosen up.
What do you want?
Whatever. But so you were shot down. You were shot down in what kind of a plane?
B-17. We were shot down, and our last mission, I was all packed and ready to come home, but we didn't make it. So they captured us. I landed in a tree, and 2 old farmers come out with a shotgun to get me down off the tree. So I behaved, and they took me in the village, and then the cops,
showed up, Marines, and they took me in charge, and they marched us in, questioned us and everything. And I wouldn't answer the questions, but they answered them for me. They knew more about the answers than I did. And they told me my pilot's name and everything, and I played dumb. Well, they sent me and put me in a train. They sent me to Austria, and we were in the camp there for 13 months. And they wouldn't feed us nothing, hot water in the morning, but thank God we got the Red Cross parcels, and they kept us alive. So after that 13 months, the Russians stopped moving in, capturing the city, so they marched us out. The Germans marched us out, and we marched for 15 days across Austria towards the American lines. We finally got there. They turned us over to the American troops and shipped us to France and shipped us home. I was glad to be there.
I bet you were. Fortunately, the people who got shot down in New Guinea, it was very difficult because there was no really rescue there at all in the jungles of New Guinea. Anybody else got something? Here we are.
You know what I think makes this group unique is the fact, and I think they'll bail me out, is you probably had more experiences with almost getting killed in non-combat situations as you did in combat.
True.
You know, I had a half a dozen of them. I don't know why I'm here.
Tell me.
I was the world's worst pilot.
And you knew it.
Absolutely. Every time I did something wrong.
Frazer, you mentioned the Tuskegee Airmen under General Hunter and at Godman Field, Kentucky, where we moved there to Seymour, Indiana, and we were there only for a short while. And what happened is that 104 of the Tuskegee Airmen were picked up and sent back down to Godman Field, Kentucky, because they call that mutiny. And the idea of it being mutiny is because the Tuskegee Airmen were assigned to separate food facilities, separate housing, separate theater, and exchange, and all of these things, separate clubs, and it was decided that this was against the regulation by the Tuskegee Airmen. And of course, in this case, one of the Tuskegee Airmen jostled, and that's the term they use, the club manager. And of those, he was the only one who was court-martialed. And it so happened that things have changed so much. And this is why I'm so happy to be here and still be alive, too, by the way. And what has happened now over 50 years is that we have a convention the Tuskegee Airmen, each year. And I was so happy to go to Indianapolis in August, and there we had 12 black general officers. Fig Newton was the 4-star, who was the commander of the Education and Training Command down at Randolph, and we had a 3-star, and we had about 5 2-star generals, and then brigadier generals. And things have changed so much since then, it's just hard to conceive of how these things have happened. Now, it so happened that this young man was a student of mine at Howard University. I was in charge of ROTC at Tuskegee for 4 years and at Howard University for 4. And Rodney Coleman, who is the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force, he was able to get the a pardoning, I would call it, to make it sound easier, of all of those who had some kind of record. They did not at the first mention Terry Roger, who was the one who had been court-martialed. And so later on, the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force, he got up and he mentioned this. And of course, he was our Tuskegee Airmen president of the National Association at the time. And he just dropped his head in his hands and just cried on the stage there. because he had finished law school and could not practice law because of this court-martial situation. But there are so many other things that have happened here. The last two Air Force commanders have been members of the Tuskegee Airmen Association. And this is the kind of recognition that we're getting now, and we're just so happy about this. Until I just wanted to mention that. Thank you.
Thank you, James. What's that?
Yeah.
Okay, Bob, have you said anything, Bob? You've been sitting here real quiet. What have you? I'm just listening. You're a listener? Okay. Anybody? Here we are, back over B-24s. Fred Beyer.
I'd like to say a couple of words. You know, most of these guys were real young. I was the 21 years old, flying a B-24 with a crew of 10.
What year were you 21?
What year? 1944.
Oh, so you're a young fella.
Yeah, yeah. So it amazes me, thinking back on it, at how high the morale was. We really didn't have a morale problem at all, and yet there were continuous efforts on the part of the Germans and others to bring down our morale. A couple of stories related to this. One was there was a lot of talk about Tokyo Rose, but they forget that we had our Axis Sally, and she had a good radio station, played all kinds of records of Harry James and Glenn Miller and Tommy Dorsey and others, and but she also threw in good little bits of information like, gee, well, all you guys are fighting the war, your wives and girlfriends are home going out with the defense workers. And that was a real cheerful note. And in addition to that, she said, you boys from the 376th, we know where you're going tomorrow, and we are waiting for you. And we got some of that magnetic flak that you've all heard about, and we're going to use it on you for the first time. And she didn't say where we were going or elaborate on this magnetic flak, but she said, oh, and by the way, if you go down to group headquarters, Colonel Gordon's clock there on the wall is 2 minutes slow. That shook things up a little bit. Another quick story, again on morale. The Germans had a couple of real morale busters. They were using rockets to their advantage near the end of the war for two reasons. One is they were firing rockets. They'd hang out, so you got a big formation here, maybe 500 to 1,000 airplanes. If we didn't have any fighter protection, because they were all over taking care of the 8th Air Force, I think. But they would lay outside and then lob these rockets, and they never hit anything, but they scared the daylights out of us. And then when we finally did get some fighters to come and help out, they had JATO assist bottles or something like that, or rockets, to give them a quick boost and run out of range of the fighters that were after them. So we got a mission assigned to us, which was the longest mission that we ever flew in 376th, to go up into an airfield in southern Germany where they had these modified craft with the rockets and the rocket assists, and they must have thought they were pretty safe up there. It was a long ways for us. It was over a 10-hour mission, and we went up there and found, much to our surprise, that they were all lined up on the runway right at we frag bombed the place and got them all. We had to fly up there at very low altitude, and I think when we finally bombed, it was around 10,000, 12,000 feet. And most of us got home on about an eyedropper full of gas. So we took care of that morale problem real good.
I see. Thank you, Fred. I see Fred, Ralph Wolf, General. I was going to call you General. General Ralph Wolf. Come on in the circle. Can you squeeze in somewhere, or bring up your chair all the way in the back here? And Ralph must have arrived late. So give us tell us who you are, Ralph.
I'm Ralph Wolf. I apologize for being late. I didn't hear about this somehow, and someone called me and said, look at LTV, and there I found Perry and Mario and Cy and friends, and I said, wow, I think I know some of these people. But I was a combat air crewman for the Navy flying the Navy version of a B-24, which was called a PB-4Y2, PB-4Y1, and there was a 2.
Give me the
And
picture.
you can pull it out of there. And I just have a couple of quick things that I thought might be of interest. During the spring of 1945, by the way, I was a nose gunner and radioman, as they call it in the Air Force. In the Navy, it's called a bow gun. But in the spring of 45, Task Force 57, commanded by Admiral Halsey, knew that there was a terrible storm and they needed some help on what to do. And I think we were the first hurricane hunters, because they came to us, a Naval Patrol Squadron, and said, we need some weather information and we don't know how to get it. We're going to ask you to fly into that storm. And they came and they asked for volunteers, and of course, we were young and didn't know any better. So we flew into that typhoon, and it was the most awesome sight I've ever seen in my life. Flying into the center, of course, tremendous turbulence going in, but we had a heavy plane, and we made it fine. In the center, the sun was shining, the sea was calm, and it was beautiful, and I had time to radio directly to Halsey's flagship the weather information we had gained going in and from the center. And we did it so well, they asked us to go back again the next day. And we said, why don't you send somebody else? They said, because now you're veterans and you know what to do. The second quick thing, Frazer, if I may.
Yeah, sure.
On the morning of August the 6th at 4 o'clock, 1945, we all reported to Combat Intelligence for briefing. We were on Tinian at that time, Perry. And we were told that all combat operations were canceled for the day, but you might want to wander down to the flight line. So we went to the flight line. We were there about 5:30. And I've never seen so much brass in all my life, nor so many MPs in short patrol, lining off the end of the runway as well as the flight line. But about 400 of us gathered, and we watched the Enola Gay taxi out, rev you up to full power, and slowly go down the runway. That runway, as some of you who have been there may remember, was about 10,500 feet. And it went very slow, and we had watched many 29s take off before. And there was a cliff at the end of the runway about 150 feet high, and the 29 disappeared. And you can imagine what 400 flight crew members, 29s, Navy, fighter pilots, etc., were like. There wasn't a sound. Until suddenly, about 5 to 10 seconds later, this 29 rose, turned north towards Japan, and there was a cheer. And we didn't know what we were cheering for, because probably only 10 or 12 people there knew what was happening. Later that afternoon, we found out. But I was one of those 400 people who saw that. It was an incredible day. Thank you.
Hey, Ralph. Yes, sir. Harding, Isaacson.
I carry a copy of my Class A pass from the 2nd Bomb Division. And I was the eldest man on the crew, being 23 years of age. I see here that my pay, including flight pay, was $93.60.
What?
Pardon?
A
month, sir.
How about that?
About my almost Purple Heart. I was on leave in London and had picked up this, or she picked me up, French girl in Piccadilly, and we went to this bar on the Strand. And this was the period when the buzz bombs were coming over. And I was sitting at the end of the bar against a wall where there was a cuckoo clock. And one of the buzz bombs dislodged the cuckoo clock and clipped me in the back of the head. And I still have the scar, but no Purple Heart.
You got a buzz bomb?
Back in the fall of '44, I went down to visit my Uncle Frank. He was, this isn't an air story, but it's almost like one. And he was down at Folkestone there by Dover, up on a cliff. And they were shooting down the V-1s when they were coming over. Knocked one off, it went right in the water. And they got most of them, too.
Yes. Harry.
I was wondering whether any of the fellows in the crews who flew in Italy, flew bombers in Italy, remember anything particular about Armistice Day 1944. Do they remember going on a mission on that day? The reason I ask is because when I woke up in the morning, I wasn't scheduled to fly. But I looked out at my tent, and it seemed to be raining, sleeting, snowing, horrible conditions. I don't think the visibility was more than, a 200-foot altitude. And I went back to my sack, and one of the guys who had gotten up a little earlier had breakfast with the fellows that were going out. It was supposed to be a maximum effort with 16 P-51s for each squadron. And he came back, and he said that the squadron commander had told everybody that he thought it was kind of crazy to go out in this weather. We weren't particularly trained in weather instrument flying, particularly, but just that the conditions were really abysmal. And he said he wouldn't make anybody go. If they didn't want to go, that was all right. And if he got court-martialed for doing this, so be it. So I think only four guys dropped out. The other 12 took off. One of my tent mates went into the drink about 20 minutes out. Nobody knows what went wrong with his plane. It could have been some of the crew chiefs say that the glycol might have frozen up or something like that. That was one. Coming back, there were two guys who just sort of disappeared. One of them, it was definite that one of them had trailed behind the squadron. I had done the same thing twice on my first 4 missions. I had gotten lazy or disturbed or wondering whether I'd ever get to sleep with a woman before I got killed. I mean, sex is ever present in the history of... so anyhow, I think I've gotten off the point, but my wife warned me that this would happen. All right, back to the point. We two guys, one of them was a tent mate. He was going into the drink. Two other guys, evidently one of them definitely trailed behind. They called him catch up. He caught up, then he drifted back. Caught up again, they called him again. The third time they looked around, he wasn't in sight. And I could swear that a half an hour after the whole rest of the bunch came back, that I heard a plane going over. It sounded like a Mustang engine, not that I've got a great ear. And it just went over. And there was still miserable visibility. So if you didn't have a good squadron leader or a good flight leader leading you in and you didn't know how to navigate, you didn't know that sort of dead reckoning, he could have wound up down by the spur and hit some of those mountains down there, just that stuck out in the Adriatic east of the Foggia fields of the B-24s. And so I was wondering, we lost 3 in my squadron. That was the worst day in my time, my 9 months over there, for my squadron. I went down to Foggia to the PX. I used to do that almost every week. And I heard a couple of bomber guys say, we never got to the target either. We never got to the target. The weather was so terrible. And I just wonder whether any of you guys who were in that area could confirm whether you know of any unusual losses by the bomber crews due to planes. I'm not looking to hang a rap. They said that the reason for that mission was that some psychological expert in the high command had figured out that if the Germans saw us flying on Armistice Day, it would teach the Germans that Americans were not a bunch of sentimental, democratic, well, you've heard Hitler's speeches, democratisches, blah, 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 blah. They would show that the Americans were tough and would scare the hell out of the Germans. I don't think it was great psychology on his part, but I was just interested in whether any of the bombers remember anything about November 11th, 1944. Thanks for your patience.
Nobody? Remember? Okay, well, we'll be back.
All right, well, I flew a B-25 from Sacramento, California, island hopping down to New Guinea, to Biak. They put Tokyo tanks in.
This was late then?
This was late.
Yeah, what year about?
It was in beginning of 45. Oh, yeah. And we 10 started out, and only 8 made it. Yeah, one crew ditched between Sacramento.
Why were you going there? What was going on?
Pardon?
Why were you taking?
We were ferrying these crafts and then we moved up to Okinawa and joined the group. But the night before we went, I went into town and I bought 16 bottles of 3 Feathers for $2.20, and I went out to the flight line and put it up in a gun hatch. And every place I went, they said, "Do you have any whiskey?" I said, "How much?" $5. The next place, Christmas Island, $10. Tarawa, $25. And finally, in Finchhofen, I got $50 a bottle. And I lived for almost a year on that and sent all my money home.
Okay, we got...
You know, one pilot story always leads to another one. And I know a lot of us have had difficult experience. Some of you had tragic experiences. But listening to this gentleman here, I'm reminded of something a little bit more humorous. In our very first flight experience, we went to primary school in the Army Air Corps. And we flew PT-23s, which were open cockpit, tandem seats. And a friend of mine with whom I roomed went up for his very first orientation flight. The instructor took him up, and it was his habit. He'd let you take the stick, and then all of a sudden he'd turn it upside down. Well, naturally, any human being is going to grab the side of the cockpit as he sees the barns going up and the farmland going past him. This kid fell out of the airplane because the safety belt wasn't fastened. And I mean, we didn't have any training or parachute jumping or anything. He's on his way down. We're only about 1,500 feet. And I talked to him later because the instructor now is giving him a lot of four-letter words because he's not taking the controls. And he's howling at him through the little tube we had. Nothing's happening. The instructor turned around with the goggles on and is swearing at him, and there's no one in the back seat. The instructor flies back, and there's a parachute down in the farmyard there. So anyhow, I asked the kid, when did the parachute open? He said, I'm reaching for my ring, and I swear the parachute opened approximately 2 feet before my feet touched the ground. So we had humorous experiences too.
Mario.
I had a very funny experience. We had encountered a Betty, and our oil tanks got all shot up, lost all the oil, both engines freeze. You have to land or get out of the thing. We all bailed out. And our instructions had always been, when you're 10 feet off the water, you know, unbuckle after your chute opens and you're sitting in a harness, unbuckle your chest strap, your leg straps, and just sit there. When you're 10 feet off the water, straighten your body up and you'll just go in, the chute will drift away from you. Well, when the sea is very calm and I'm looking at it, I thought my eyesight was pretty good in those days, and I didn't know what 10 feet was, and I wasn't about to let go of the chute. So I just straightened up and hung on to the risers. And I figured when my feet touch the water, I'll let go of it. But when my feet touched the water, the breeze just kind of laid it down, and it was like a half hemisphere on the water, and I could see through the vent hole. And it's taking me right to that spit of sand over there. And gee, this is great. I don't even have to swim, you know. Well, with that, I hear, hey, hey. And I look over, and there's a submarine sitting there. And guy says, there two of them up there on the bridge in the conning tower, and he says, let go of the chute, we'll pick you up. All I could think of was, are you guys going to submerge? And they sat there and talked it over a little bit, and then they decided that the answer I was looking for was no, and that's what they told me. So I let go of the chute. Thank God that I did. That atoll I was headed for was nothing but coral reef. And had I been dragged across that by that parachute, I wouldn't be here to talk about it today. But anyway, I let go of the chute, swam over to it. The sub was right alongside of me. Swam over to it. They picked me up, got me in down below, and as soon as I'm in the control room, I hear hatches clanging shut. They had already picked up the rest of my crew. I hear air hissing out of the ballast tanks, and this thing is going down. And I ran up to the skipper, and I screamed at him and called him every foul name you could think of. I says, you told me you weren't going to submerge. All he did was crack up laughing, and very fortunately, I didn't get into any trouble over it.
Great. Okay, Casey.
Can I tell a dog story?
A dog story? Sure.
well,
Free country, Casey.
I'm American too. On our way, we just finished combat training in India. We were on the way from Calcutta over the hump with our plane. It was a P-40. We had 10 days in Calcutta. I picked up this puppy, and I kept him in the hotel and fed him like crazy, and he wouldn't do anything. I mean, he wouldn't do any doo-doos. And anyway, I took him. I was going to take him over the hump, and I got him, put him in the cockpit, and flew over the hump. And the hump's about 20,000 feet flying. And all of a sudden, this guy let go. 10 days of it, he let go. And it was all this green stuff was over the instrument panel, the canopy, and everything. And
You were on instruments, right?
and besides being that I was the only American Chinese, I felt the pressure, you see. And so I land in Kunming, right? And I come up to the line, and the crew chief opens the counter. He says, "Oh shit!" and he looked at me, and he assumed I couldn't fly out. He thought it was me. The puppy had gone way in the tail, and he thought it was me that was. Well, I'm just trying to tell you. That's all.
Oh dear.
Before we knock it off, we'll have a little quiet for the boys that aren't here.
Yeah. I think we've got about 10 more minutes, actually, and so Ed was saying that we should have a little quiet time for our pals who were. I can tell you that my co-pilot, Bernard J. Foley, finally got his own crew, and was flying off of WWII, and some just never returned. Nobody knows. And we looked for him for about 3 days, so, and there are all kinds of, I'm sure everybody has a has a tale like that. Last summer I was sitting somewhere, and I've always felt guilty that I have never done anything like this. I mean, this shocks me that there's so many of us here. It really kind of is exciting, but I've never been to any kind of an Air Force reunion. How many of you haven't? Let's put it that way. And it's really. But I said to myself, I wonder if I can name my crew, and it's I mean, there are only 5 in my crew, so it should be fairly easy. And by gosh, I did. I could name every one of them: Quentin Chittenden, Leroy Teal, Bernard J. Foley, Quentin Strickland. I can't think of his first name. Well, they all over. Foley came from Memphis, Tennessee, and Leroy Teal came from Portland, Oregon. And but I was interesting that I could remember.
Out of 10 of our crew, there were only 4 of us left: the pilot and nose gunner, and I was in the ball, and the radio operator. I have seen most of them through life, but we got separated when we came back from overseas, and one went this way, one went that way. So it was about 30, 40 years later, my son in North Haven gets a call, and the fellow says, "You Jim McCrossan?" And my son said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "Would you be in Italy?" And he says, "No, I don't think so. I think you need my father." And it was my pilot. And he found my name in the phone book. He was visiting out here in West Hampton. So since then, we have gotten together. Christmas time, we write cards and things. But over the years, we lost our navigator in Italy. He was shot down with another crew. We lost our bombardier, who went to pilot's training in Korea. And our co-pilot, who was a career man in the he died. And then we just lost one of the engineers. Well, 2 of the engineers are gone. But we went over as a crew. We trained out in California. We picked up an airplane. in San Francisco, and just like Fred was saying, guy's 19, 20 years old. They gave him a plane, probably was, well, $500,000. Here, take it to Italy, you know. So that's what we did. We flew it across down South America, on over the Drink, and then on into Italy.
I've always wondered about fighter pilots without a crew. How did you guys feel about? Was it your crew chief that you sort of loved the best or hated the best?
Funny, I called him Tex all the time because I think all of white guys are Tex. But the guy's name was Bill Ritter. And it's very funny because I really liked him. And they took very good. But once we would go back to pick up the new plane, the P-51, we were getting new 51. And I went over to India. I said, "What do you want?" He said, "Spam." I said, "That's nuts," because in China we were getting fresh eggs and fresh stuff, but they were, the guys over there, the crews or the ground crews, really wanted Spam. So I loaded the plane up.
That's what we're getting in a few minutes. We're getting Spam.
And a rug. I had the ammo taken out of the wooden, what do you call the guns, you know, the trays, you know, and put all the rugs in. It was full of Spam and rugs.
I wanted to know what they did with that airplane the other airplane. They just
had the Spam in it?
Yeah. No. The dog. What did they? Would they burn it?
God, I mean, but
Paulie, were you an aircrew member? No. Oh, you weren't. Oh, well, you can't talk there.
The mayor of East Hampton.
Oh. That'd be good, is all I have to say.
This is a non-political, but just a comment of gratitude and thanks on behalf of the village community to each of you gentlemen who did so much.
You're going to get a medal or something?
We're working on it. We're working on it. But, Casey, I knew you'd come up with something like that. But seriously, I think I share the warmth of the entire village, in fact, all of East Hampton, to thank you some 50 years after the event for all the efforts that you put forth. I'd like to share one moment. I was too young to serve in World War II, thank goodness. But having just come back from Germany, and of course with the reunification, there's a very telling monument, not too visible, but it was placed there by the German government that pays tribute to all the United States airmen who were involved in the European theater. It's not too far from what was formerly the Gestapo headquarters. So I just wanted to share that with you this morning. Even the German government, who at that time was adversarial, recognized your efforts. God bless each and every one of you.
John Sherry, thank you, Paul. Thank you.
You know, you were talking before about P-47s, and that gentleman over there flew one. There's a perfectly marvelous thing that comes on sometimes on Channel 13 called Diary of a Fighter Pilot, which is fantastically interesting because those P-47s towards the end of the war just became giant killing machines. They put more and more armament on them. They didn't fool around with other fighters. They were after railroad trains and troops and stuff like that. It's an extraordinary series if you ever get a chance to see it.
I think, Matt, when we're going out, we'll talk and go out and roll the credits while we talk and just don't worry about any formal closure. Is that okay? Okay, so yeah, Percy. Okay.
In my class, there were only 16 of us who graduated finally.
Can the camera get in on that real close?
But on that picture, out of the 16 guys, someone mentioned getting killed in training. Well, my roommate was killed. He got his tail cut off joining a formation, Ephraim Earl Totley from Philadelphia. And a young kid who put his age up to even get in. He built model airplanes all his life. We went up on I was on this flight. We were flying cloud formation, and this instructor led us into a thunderstorm. And Lloyd Anthony Nathaniel Carter spun out, and he went in a P-40 out in the woods somewhere, and it looked like a swimming pool where they found the plane. It was about 15 feet into the ground, and under the thunderstorm was just full of water. But 2 guys out of those 16 were lost just in training.
Okay, we're about running out of steam here, so let's just keep talking, and we can all start talking at once, or whatever it is, and sing off we go into the...
Here got $21 a month.
When I first
$21 a month. Yeah. Right.
That was $21 a day, once a month.
Yeah. They touched on the topic of fear, but I don't recall anybody talking about superstition, which played a big part in.
Oh, yes.
Well, this is not a story about me, but it's a story about a friend of mine who was flying B-24s of a Ploesti, and his name came up on the battle order, and he had the GIs. And he didn't want to take his name off the battle order, so he stuck it out, and the next morning he still had him. And with fear and trepidation, he's a pilot, he was going to take off. And they did. And before he got to 10,000 feet, he had filled up the flak helmets and and a few other things. And now they're up at about 24,000 feet going to target. And there's flak flying, and there's fighters, and there's the whole bit. And he reaches under his seat, grabs the helmet, puts it on his head, and he flies through the whole, gets to the target, drops the bombs. And he said he had no idea what had happened. He was so damn scared until he got well off the target. They called him craphead anglers after that.
Are we are we off, or are we still running? Who knows? Who's the floor manager? Yeah. Bernie Cooper? Bernie Comfort? Is Bernie Comfort here? No, I don't think so. Yes. Yes, you can suggest anything.
That before we break, that all of us can stand up for a moment of silence for our buddies.
Yes, okay, we're all going to stand up and for a moment of silence, fellas, for those guys of us who aren't here. Thank you for coming. Very much for coming. It really was wonderful. Hats off to you.